Welcome into the Inside Bassmaster Podcast presented by Black Rifle Coffee Company, episode 156 of the podcast. I'm your host today, Ronnie Moore. My co-host, like usual, Kyle, Jessie, and Kyle. This is going to be a short podcast, but we are going to outline the 2024 Bassmaster Elite Series roster. This is something that as soon as the schedule ends for 2023 and the season is done, we crown Angler of the Year, we solidify classic spots. All of a sudden, everyone talks about next year's schedule and then next year's crop of qualifiers and who is on the Elite Series for 2024. So just to talk about in general, the number of anglers and how we get to it. So when we think about the Elite Series roster, we had 103 anglers this past year. And then, or 104 anglers this past year at the beginning of the year. 104 anglers. We had 2 medical exemptions, 2 legends exemptions. And you can see that's how we get from 100 to 104. So our Elite Series roster is formulated and based on 100 pros. And then any medical injuries or any legends exemptions are added on to the field. So when we are making next year's roster, there will be people who do not requalify. We have to get down to a certain number to then welcome the new group in. So before we get into individual names and who qualified and the routes they did, the big thing that was a change for 2023, it's going back to the old system, Kyle, and that was if you're in the top 70 in the points race in the Angler of the Year, you're safe for that next season. Doesn't matter what your AOY average is, you're safe for that next season. And then the rest of them formulated in that 15 or 20 spots are formulated by AOY average. And then we add in the new guys based on qualification. So that's how we kind of get to 100 or 103, which is the number it's going to be for 2024.
Yeah, which is a fair deal too. You know, typically I keep my nose out of these decisions as much as possible. Not because I, don't have an opinion, but because everybody else has an opinion. I don't really care if they know my opinion. But the one thing I will say on that is you think about it, finishing in the top 70 or above.
Yep.
If you have one bad year and one decent year and your average, between the 2 years is still not very great, that's a tough go. I mean, if you have a really bad first year, which a lot of rookies do, I mean, that's just the reality of it. It's a different change. Not all rookies jump into the NFL or the MLB and have a lot of success. I mean, that's just the reality of it. Part of what makes you a rookie a lot of times. But if you have a tough year your first year and being able to, back it up with the, just a better year, the year afterwards, a top 70 or above, that allows you to continue and extend your career and, have a chance, I guess is the best way to put it. So I'm super happy with that. I think that's a good way to calculate it. And I'm, like I said, for the anglers in that sense, I'm super happy that's the way it is.
And if you think about it like this, anglers, if you're not good enough or deserving enough, you will be found out. Like if you're not a good angler, you can't hide it for that long without being exposed,
Sure.
or just whittling yourself out. And so when we look at it, the reason we went back from overall average, so in 2018 when the split happened, 2019 we had the average for the field. No one, half the field had never been on the Elite Series. No one had any tangible B.A.S.S statistics at the Elite Series level. So we had to spend a few years formulating statistics on a different scale than we'd ever been on. Now that we've had 4 or 5 years, at least with these anglers, most of them, we now can implement the system that used to be there from the beginning of the Elite Series existence. Top 70% of the field get to stay and requalify themselves every year based on performance. Then the others are determined by average. That allows somebody who's a top 20 angler, perennial angler, that if you stumble and you're below 70th, you're not just out. Your average the last few years matters, and that's the way we can do it. But like you said, if you have a tough year as a rookie, let's just say you come into a field size of 103, you finish 90th place in AOY. You're 20 spots behind that line, but hey, you're a rookie. You get 2 years guaranteed on the Elite Series before you may not requalify. If you're 90th after year 1, the average spot that we normally see that bottom 8 to 10 anglers that are at risk of not requalifying, when you see that line, it's around a 55th place AOI average, 55, 57, maybe 52, maybe 60. It's in that mid 50s range for the most part. So you're telling me if you're 90th in year one, you have to go get top 20 in AOI the next year just to have a good enough average to possibly stay on the Elite Series in the last spot. We don't want, as an organization, to have an angler qualify for the Bassmaster Classic and get relinquished in the same year. It was getting to the position where anglers were, I'm going to have to make the Classic and I still might, not requalify for the Elite Series. We can't have an angler at the end of the year punching their ticket to the Bassmaster Classic and fist bumping and then having to do some math to make sure they requalified for the Elite Series the next year. That doesn't make any sense. So now that we have tangible statistics for years, we've never had that happen, by the way, but we were getting to the point where there was a couple people that if they went and popped a good event or a good season like we know they can, all of a sudden they're in that boat of unprecedented nature. So we wanted to make sure everyone had the chance to requalify, even going into the last two events of the season. If you're 85th in points, Kyle, you can go pop 2 top 20s in the Northern Swing and be able to stay requalified for the Bassmaster Elite Series. So it gives everyone the opportunity to go do that. We also have the final event of the season is winning in. So if you're an Elite Series pro and you have had a miserable career, you've had a miserable season, all your goals are out the window. No, they're not. You still have a chance to stay requalified with a good ending of the year. And if you win the last one, you can accomplish the Classic, which is a goal anglers have. So you're still in it. Just like in bass fishing, if you have 5 casts left in the day, you can still catch the weight needed to do well in a tournament. If you're at the end of the year needing a few good events, you can still requalify or qualify for the Bassmaster Classic. So that's the reasoning behind it. Is there anything that you have to add onto that? But we would surely hate to have someone qualify for the Classic and then we got to say, we got you a spot in the Opens, man. Good job this year. Roll that into the Opens to try to requalify.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's ever changing times, and there's so many factors to think about. And our tournament department, in my opinion, does such a good job of considering all the factors, hearing the anglers out, thinking of what the best possible scenario is to, not only help the anglers, but protect the anglers. I mean, when you make it to the Elite Series, obviously, it's the Elite Series for a reason. So, I mean, again, like you said, it's not fair for a lot of situations to, make somebody have to finish in the scenario you mentioned in the top 20, in AOI just to, requalify for the Elite Series. I mean, a top 20 in AOI is nothing short of, I wouldn't say a miracle because guys do it all the time naturally, but like it's hard. That's not easy to do at all. So putting some like that'd be like the equivalent of like anybody that's ever taken a test or gone to college or high school, whatever your education level may be. That'd be like, getting to the last test of the year, like the final in college, and you have to make a 95 or better on the business law final to
no
pass
one's
the
ever
class.
made a 95.
I'm not even going to that class because I'm not even going to that final because I'm not going to pass it. I'm wasting my time. And that again, anybody that's been in that scenario in any walk of life understands that that's a very, very, very difficult feat. And I'll reiterate the thing I said earlier, but just me personally, I think that's the best thing for the anglers, and it makes me happy because you don't see a guy go into his first year, struggle really hard, and you don't have to look at that guy and be like, he's done. Like he's done. Like that's
dead
it.
dead man walking. Yeah.
That's a tough thing to do
100%.
for the organization. It's a tough thing to do for, the other anglers, their peers. I mean, like it's just a good thing overall.
And so one big thing that we do at B.A.S.S. that fans absolutely hate is that we keep the AOI average requalification list secret. We keep it quiet because our sport is different. If an angler decides to retire, like we've had a few do this year, all of a sudden, if you are the first man out on the requalification list, you're back in if you want to be. Second guy, same thing. So if we announce this list of the guys at the end of the year who did not requalify for the Elite Series, and the whole industry and the world knows, and then people retire because there's a month and a half, 2 months before you pay your deposits. And even up to the day of deposits, people weren't sure if they were going to be back on the Elite Series or not. I know Larry Nixon was contemplating it, and, and others were contemplating those things. So you have all the way up until early November from the end of August that the whole industry would have counted these people out of the Elite Series, and then you have people retire or not come back, and all of a sudden they're back in. Now they have to sell themselves to sponsors to try to maintain deals or grow deals. And the whole industry knows that 2 or 3 bad events to start the year, we don't have to pay this guy. He's going to be done. And that's not the way we want our sport to go, of anglers already trying to put themselves out there. And it doesn't matter if you're the first one to requalify for the Elite Series or the last one to requalify for the Elites. You are on that plane of opportunity and platform. So that's why we keep it quiet for times like 2023. A lot of changes, Kyle. So we started 2023 with 104 anglers. We will start 2024 with 103 anglers. So we have one less angler for our maximum field size of 103 next year. So 12 anglers have left the Elite Series by way of not requalifying or retiring. They have stepped away from the Elite Series, those 12, and 11 are now coming in to fill those roles. So let's go over the qualifiers real quick. Obviously, a giant chunk of that is from the Bassmaster Opens. We also have an angler from the Bass Nation. And then also there's an opportunity for Legends Exemptions, which are anglers who have won a Classic or an AOY. And it gets you in separate categories. We've seen Gerald Swindle, Brandon Polinick come back on a Legends Exemption in previous years. Guys like Rick Clunn, David Fritz, Larry Nixon have all used Legends Exemptions to stay on the Elite Series or to participate. So there's a couple ways to do it, but the 9 anglers from the Bassmaster Opens, we've covered it before, but we'll cover it again. If you look at the top 10 in the Opens points race from 2023, all 10 are on the Elite Series because Kenta Kimura is wedged in there as a current active elite who is in good standing. So we skip him. So the first 9 that are not Elite Series qualified, which would be the top 10 in points, counting Kenta Kimura. So JT Tompkins, John Garrett, Trey McKinney, Robert G. We obviously have Kenta. Then we have Tyler Williams, Wesley Gore, Logan Parks, Ben Milliken, and Kyle Patrick. That is your 9 angler class coming from the Opens into the Elite Series. We added one more angler from the Bass Nation, and that was normally reserved for the Bass Nation National Champion, which was Will Davis Jr. in 2022. He won that event to make the Bassmaster Elite Series and the Classic. Well, why don't we just do something unprecedented, Kyle, and go back to back? No one's ever won back-to-back Bass Nation championships. He does that this year. He's already on the Elite Series. He's already on the Classic. So he helps out David Gaston get a Classic berth from the Elite Series list. And then he helps out Timothy Doobie, I believe I was saying that right, to qualify from the Bass Nation into the Elite Series as the second place finisher, but the first angler non-elite qualified the opportunity to say yes. So there's 10 of our 11 anglers that'll be added to the Elite Series. And like you said, Tim Doobie is about the only angler that we don't know a ton about, just based on how good the Opens were this year in the coverage.
Yeah, a couple things. One, the fact that Will Davis Jr. wins the nation championship, hilarious, because he gets in another guy from Sylacauga, Alabama, 2 guys from the same relatively small town in Alabama, one helping the other out. And then 2, the one thing I talked about a lot here in the office, just amongst other coworkers, was the fact that it's crazy to think in the history of the nation championship that's never happened before.
Yeah.
And normally in a field of 200 plus, you'd be like, yeah, I mean, statistically speaking, the odds are not that good. In the nation championship field, that's kind of surprising because
There's
one,
50.
the guy that, exactly. The guy that wins it the first time, I'd say more often than not, you just look at the amount of nation qualifiers in the Elite Series, those guys end up being sticks, like more often than not. It's just
Ike,
kind of the truth.
Polinick, Mueller,
Right.
Summerall,
I mean,
all of them.
you go through all of them, and it's crazy. And to think that none of those guys, went back to back, or none of the guys in the past have done it, it's kind of an amazing thought. So the fact that we have a little twist and turn with Tim, getting in there based on, and I didn't say his last name because I'm like you, I'm not sure if it's Dubé.
I texted GL Compton, the tournament director of the nation. I asked him, and I said, "Is it Doob, like Doob, or is it Doobie, like Do-Bee?" And he said Doobie, and then I sent him I sent him a Snoop Dogg gif, and so I said Doobie. You like that? Okay, that's
really
perfect.
sophisticated, and it's Tim Dubé.
Yeah, exactly.
A little asterisk over the E or
Exactly.
something.
So there's your 10 anglers. And like you said, yeah, the only time we've ever had the second place nation angler make the Elite Series, I'm pretty sure, was when Ryan Levine won at Lake Conroe in 2015, maybe 2016, to make the classic. He made it, but then also I think Fabian Rodriguez was second place and he got the Elite Series bid to be on the Elites that next year. So unprecedented for the most part, for sure. So that gets us 10. There's an 11th angler that we will discuss that will come back via Legends Exemption. And so to break down that, we had a couple departures, and we'll get to that list in just a moment as well. But David Fritz had ran his course in terms of how many Legends points. So people don't know that your Legends Exemption gets you into the Elite Series, but it can only keep you on for as many accolades as you have had. So like, for instance, Larry Nixon had 3 Legends Exemption years because he won 2 AOIs in a classic. So he used, one in his first year, and then he retired. So Larry Nixon, in theory, still has 2 more Legends Exemptions he could use to be on the Elite Series at some point if he decided, in 5 years to wild hair that he's dominated, around Arkansas with forward-facing sonar, that he wants to come back in, whatever the case may be. David Fritz had used a few the last couple years, and he has now ran his course there. Rick Clunn will never run out of them, I feel, just because of his accolades and his age. He's entering his 50th year, his 500th Bass event upcoming, and I would honestly don't want to see. I don't want to see Rick Clunn retire, but I also would love to see him retire this year as well, having 50 years, like a perfect clean number. That would be absolutely incredible. So we normally have had 2 Legends Exemptions per Elite Series roster. We're not obligated to having 2. We're not obligated to having 1. We could have 3. We've never had 3. That's the thing. We've always had 1 or 2. And so you never really know. It's based on interest at times. It's based on participation. If there's an elite angler that needs it to keep his career going, an opens angler that is doing that to jump in the Elite Series, there's a lot of different reasons. But with Nixon retiring and Fritz, not being on the Elite Series for 2024, that opens up a legend spot. And that means you either go down the Elite list for legends that need it. No one needed it. You go down the opens list. No one in the opens was a former legend. So now it's based on, the overall list and inquiry. And Jordan Lee will be back on the Bassmaster Elite Series in 2024 by way of his 2 classic victories back to back there in 2017 and 2018. So Jordan Lee will be on the Elite Series for the 2024 roster, and he will be the second legend lining up beside Rick Clunn in those spots. So vastly different careers and ages and stages of career, but welcome back to the Elite Series, Jordan Lee.
Yeah, it's super exciting. I think that goes without saying. Obviously, for the fans, the everybody that loves the sport. I mean, that's an awesome thing. I had the opportunity to write the story of him coming back, and when we were talking on the phone, he was like, in my head, it's like Jordan Lee's been fishing for a really long time, and he has, but at 32. That's not really, like, I'm 27 and I don't feel old at all. And I'm like, this dude's just a few years older than me. Yet you look at the accolades. I mean, 1.133 million, at least somewhere around that ballpark in bass earnings. I mean, it's just really incredible. And it kind of goes without saying that excited to have him back on the Elite Series this year.
Yeah, and a huge proponent to the growth of college fishing. The Lee brothers, at their stage of the career, like you said, he doesn't seem that old. He seems like he's really young. He seems like he's been doing it for a long time, though. 32. I fished against him when he was in college. I remember at Chateau in the national championship, driving by his wrap boat because he was a representative, for the college series, and same with Matt. And it's like, so to see them now have a couple different portions of their career, times with Bass, times away, and then time, to return to Bass. So Jordan will be back in the Legends Exemption role. And now he'll have the opportunity. So to outline it, let's just say Jordan Lee does not finish in the top 70 in points this next season. I'm not sure. I'll have to check if his average restarts or if it's still career average and carries over. But let's just say he gets last place in points and he has one more Legends point to be able to come back. So we can assume at minimum we will see Jordan Lee in 2024 and 2025 on the Elite Series representing in that way. So some new blood returns. And we'll be completely honest. I had some Elite Series guys call me, not going to name them, but some were really excited, some were not, necessarily. There's obviously a tentativeness, there's the split, everything that happens there. But this is an earned position. Same thing that you have. Not everyone's going to agree with it. When Swindle returned, when Polinick returned, when some of these guys even came back through the opens and qualified, you still have some animosity at times, most likely, but not everyone's going to be your friend. And I will say, this is a good move for Jordan Lee, and this is a good move for Bassmaster. So that is the big bombshell to fill out the Elite Series roster, is Jordan Lee becoming an Elite Series pro once again. We mentioned the 9 qualifiers from the opens. We mentioned the Bass Nation as well. Now, a little bit different situation. Let's talk about a couple of the names briefly that will not be on the Elite Series in 2024 just because of qualification averages or stepping away from the sport. And we know we'll go low-hanging fruit off the bat. Larry Nixon retiring, David Fritz obviously coming to the close of his career as well. Then you have Bradley Hallman stepping away after being on the Elite Series for a few years, stepping away from the sport, coming back through the opens qualifying, and now retiring once again to spend time with family. I feel like this is not for good. Bradley's not an old man, but he accomplished something that he wanted to see if he could do. I want to requalify for the Elite Series. I did that, and now I'm at the stage I want to be with my family once again. So back in Oklahoma with his family. We also had the same type of situation for Micah Frazier on the Elite Series for 9 years, and really desired to be there with his young kids as they grow up. So he steps away, gets some other business ventures. We got to talk to him in a few episodes ago of the podcast. Some other news: Keith Poche will not return to the Bassmaster Elite Series. He has decided, because he fished both professional tours last year, he has decided to go the other route and will not be on the Elite Series for 2024. So that opened up another spot. And that is why we mentioned we do not broadcast the requalification list, because we have had Micah Frazier, Bradley Hallman, and Keith Poche all not return to the Elite Series for different circumstances. And that is 3 anglers who would have been on the outside looking in of requalification that are now back into the Elite Series and a part of the roster. So we still will have roughly, I think, 8 to 9 anglers not returning, and I can list them off quickly. Gary Klaus, I mentioned Keith Poche, Frazier, Hallman, I mentioned them, David Fritz, Daryl Gleason, David Williams, Josh Douglas, Masayuki Matsushita, Skylar Hamilton, and then Fritz and Nixon. I think I mentioned Fritz twice. Sorry, David. My apologies. I just wanted to say your name again. But yeah, that totals to about 11 or 12 exiting the Elite Series and 11 coming in to make 103.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, it's tough every year when you have to, there's guys that just don't requalify. I mean, that's obviously the way it is in any sport. You look at roster cuts for NFL teams, same way with any professional sport. Obviously, that's one of the tougher things. It's the thing nobody likes to talk about, rightfully so, because these guys are, peers of the anglers, peers of us in working for Bass, friends, obviously a lot of them. And it is tough, but at the same point, every year you get super excited for the start of something new, start of something fresh. It creates opportunity, obviously, for these guys coming in, the young guys coming in on the opens. I mean, there would be no Patrick Walters, Drew Cooks, all these young guys that in such a short amount of time have had such an impact on the sport if those opportunities didn't present themselves. So, as one door closes, I guess, if you want to say, another door opens for another young guy, another guy that's well deserving to be there as well. So it's a tough part about the sport. It's something again, is tough for me personally, because, you be around those guys all the time out on tournaments and around these guys, and it's tough. But for me, I'm super, super excited for the upcoming season and to see all these new guys in action.
And I'll say this, the conversation that we're having right now about requalification and the hard part of a pro being relegated or dropping down to the opens. This is the whole purpose. People may think that we're building up the opens to capitalize on other professional leagues and what they're doing or not doing. That is not the case at all. That is a bonus to what we're doing. But the growth of the opens and the desired format is to emulate the Elite Series. And also, when the Elite Series anglers do not requalify, it is a place for them to go where they can possibly make a living without having to stress. Back in the day when you'd have 3 events to requalify for the Elite Series, you would go and fish one division. You can't make a living off of one division of the opens. Now, 9 events, it's more cost, but it's more opportunity for money and finances. Now we have an added AOI payout. Now the checks go down. They're bigger and they go down farther in the field. This conversation about requalification for the Elite Series is the reason the opens are getting a bump and a boost, because we want a successful landing spot for these pros that have dedicated their lives to professional fishing, that they're not going to go flip burgers tomorrow, that they can hustle in other ways, but they have a 9 tournament circuit that gives them national exposure, FS1 coverage, and a payout plus AOI at the end of the year that they can possibly shuck and jive enough, gives them some time as well to create content, be an asset to their brand and their sponsors, to then now, if they take that step back up, they're good enough to make it one time, they're good enough to make it another time. And so this opens is the platform that they can fall right back to, that they can now have still, they don't feel relegated to where no one knows what they're doing, no one knows they're paying attention. This is going to get a lot of traffic and a lot of attention. So obviously, we are not creating the opens platform for other anglers who do not represent the Bass brand. We're creating it for the Bass anglers to try and create that platform that's sustainable for years to come. So 103 pros, any way you cook it and cut it. You got anglers at the end of the year. Carl Jacobson's been talking about it for years, about always riding that requalification line. Now we see his stability, 2 classic qualifications in a row, well within qualification. His average is getting better every year that he does better. You talk about guys like Matty Wong, who are feeling it in the final event of the season. They go and make a top 10 and they survive to fish another year. That is just the way it goes. But I encourage you to follow these anglers, to know their story, to know the pressure they're under, and to see them perform at the highest level that they can at the end of the seasons to stay requalified. But like you said, it could be a loss in March for a team that prevents them from making the playoffs in baseball, and it is a lost fish or a missed cut at the beginning of an Elite Series season. It's not always the last event of the season that is the big difference. So we see a lot of stress, a lot of pressure, but it is a tough moment for us to not be able to work with some of these anglers anymore. Like, I was with Larry Nixon the day before deposits were due, and he was saying, I'm not quite sure yet what my body's telling me and what my finances are telling me what I want to do. But if this is my last cast was at the St. Lawrence, I'm at peace. I'm happy. If I get to cast next year at Toledo Bend and beyond, I'll be happy as well. So that's a lot of these guys have come to terms with over the last few months if they are not requalified, and they're at peace with it and have formulated a game plan. We'll see a few of those names in the opens next year, all 9 of them ready to go again.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at the opens with the additional coverage coming this next year. I mean, there's not going to be, as much of a drop off as there has been in the past. Obviously, we're going to be connected to these guys. It was like that this year in 2023. And obviously the coverage and everything's going to be extended even more so in 2024. So certainly, like you mentioned, it's going to provide a platform, an area, almost another tour, if you will. That's something that a lot of the anglers that's a term that they used a lot. And that's kind of what this opportunity is providing. And the extra coverage is going to go a long ways in that.
Yeah, and I think that no matter where you're fishing, if you treat it with respect and hold it to a high authority and a high account, integrity wise and desire wise and positivity, you can build up a league in public perception that is to the level you want it to be. That is what these anglers who are avid about the opens have done. They've spoken to us about it. We have been able to increase coverage, increase payouts, things like that. All steps in the right direction. So take pride in where you fish. You may not be to your goals just yet, but your goals are achievable. And we're seeing that every year with a new crop of Elite Series rookies, or a crop that are saying, goodbye to a career that they've had, and whether that's retirement or stepping away for other ventures. So that's the Elite Series roster for 2024. Can't wait. It feels like the season's going to be here very soon. We do have a little bit of time still, December and January, before we get into the tournaments in February. But Kyle, appreciate you joining me. Want to do a short one real quick just to talk about the Elite Series roster, the changes to qualifications, and how we can wrap our heads around that. But for the next episode of the podcast, Kyle, it's soon. Registration. Not only did the anglers put deposits down for the elites, marshals have to start registering, opens guys are registered, and we're going to see these fields fill up on both sides of the boat, front and back, very soon. We'll see you in the next episode of the podcast.